right, so surprise to me, I got a comment. Where have you been? We're depending on you to give your opinion on the Wheel of Time show, and um, that's always a surprise. I'm just some guy. I have opinions, but you know what they say, everybody's got them. So, uh, the answer to the question "Where have you been?" is I've been watching other stuff that's much better and reading stuff that's much better than watching this terrible show. Episode 4 came out almost a week ago, and I'm just not interested in watching it. It's I watched episode 2 and 3, and it has the same problems. And the problem basically boils down to that this is how a lot of TV shows are written these days, with comic book exposition, long, ponderous speeches that don't do anything for the plot, except make the characters sound pretentious. They, the response that I'm seeing from people who haven't read the books, reverse image. The response I'm seeing from people who haven't read the books is that they don't know what's going on. They don't know who these people are. They don't know why they're running across, this giant expanse of between these mountains. They don't know. They just don't know what their motivation is. It doesn't make any sense. And the problems that I saw in the first episode are only magnified as you go into the second and third episode. And other than just this is how TV shows are written, I think the big problem is that they made a choice to do the exact opposite of what Robert Jordan did and not introduce the characters first. So I haven't fully fleshed out this theory, but my prevailing theory right now is that basically they're trying sort of a comic book strategy, which is that you've got a cool hero in tight clothes, in tight pants, and you fill in the substance of that character later. If you're doing an origin story like Iron Man or the first Avenger, Captain America, the first Avenger, then you meet the person first, and then they put on the suit. But the tension in a kind of story like that depends on the people already knowing that the guy's going to put on the spandex. So you don't have that with the Wheel of Time, especially not without there's an established audience, but they're trying to attract new viewers, trying to attract people who haven't read the book. And the people who haven't read the book, including the reviewers of the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Entertainment Weekly, who clearly haven't read the books, they don't know what's going on, and they say it goes nowhere. They say it goes nowhere. What are these people doing? Why do they? And that's the response you get as a writer when you haven't told or shown your readers or your audience who the characters are. You haven't gotten the audience to relate to the characters as people. And so that has everything to do with the choice they made in order to put the cool stuff first and the characters later. And to my mind, after having watched the second and third episode, they haven't even gotten into who the characters actually are. And it's no wonder, because the characters are boring, they're dull, and plenty of them are just jerks. I mean, like, we meet Tom Maryland, who is a mentor figure, and it's not just his nature to be an exciting guy that everybody wants to listen to. That is his job. He is a gleeman. He's a balladeer. He's a traveling bard. He's a traveling singer, song and dance man. And he juggles and he throws fire bombs and he recites epic poems for hours on end. Um, and then when they introduce him in the show, he's this dreary, this dreary character playing the sad song on a beat up old guitar. Why is he playing a guitar? He plays the harp. He's a former court bard. He plays the harp. The Tom in the books would not be caught dead playing a crappy instrument like that, even if he was in a terrible little mining town like they have him on the show. But what's worse than that? What's worse than that is then he finishes his horribly depressing song that I wouldn't be listening to if it came on in a tavern. The song is poorly formed and it's just not fun to listen to. And it's also just like a nod to some of these clever aphorisms that are in the books. Men, what is it? Women forgive, but they never forget. Men forget, but they never forgive. I might be screwing that up. Anyway, but then they get down and he robs Matt. Why the hell is he doing that? That's just a dick move that, like, it doesn't show him as being clever or interesting in any way. Same thing with all the characters. Perrin, Lan, Nynaeve. I mean, they haven't shown anything interesting about these people, and that's entirely a choice on the part of the writers and the showrunner. There's a bunch of wild stuff happening to them, but if you've ever written a novel or a short story, you know that if you have wild, crazy stuff happening to people that the readers don't know, then they're just going to be like, okay, I can see wild, crazy stuff happening to, any movie I, am watching on, in any movie, and it doesn't matter unless you have characters established, and that's just all there is to it. So I noticed this particularly because I thought Game of Thrones did a much better job of this, and this is really funny to point out because I didn't like Game of Thrones at all. I didn't like the books or the show. I watched the first episode, and they introduced the characters one by one. They said interesting things about them. They showed, unique conflicts that they were getting into. They established their internal motivations, their values. Ned Stark's values are very clear. You have, Jon Snow talking to Tyrion, and it's all very clear what troubles these people and what's important to them. That wasn't enough for me to like the show, but it was still, it just had too many other problems for me. But they still did a fantastic job of introducing the characters, and there you go. Look at how successful that was. And it doesn't matter if the characters are bad people. You can still introduce them in a way that makes them human. And my two favorite examples of that are The Godfather and Miller's Crossing. Both of those movies open with monologues where the characters, and in both these cases, they're actually side characters. But, Shakespeare did this all the time. You have side characters that come in and they say, this is what's important to me. This is what I believe in. And this is why I'm not getting it, or this is what I'm going to do about it. So in The Godfather, you have the Undertaker. I forget what his name is, Buenaventura or something like that. And he's explaining to Vito, to the Godfather, to Don Corleone, about what he believes in. He believes in justice, and he believes in the truth of, what ought to be the ideal, sort of American justice. And he's saying, but the police, the district attorney, they let me down, and that's why I'm coming to you. And in Miller's Crossing, you have Johnny Casper, explaining to Leo and Tom, this is my problem with Bernie Birnbaum, because I am a man of character, and I am a man of honesty. I do these things. I fix a fight once in a while. That's me. And she says, I'm a sporting man, but every time I deal with Bernie Birnbaum, I have this particular problem, and I can't have that. And that sets up the whole movie. A 2-hour movie where the plot gets very twisted, and the character motivations are not always clear, but it almost doesn't matter because that's set up in the first few minutes where Casper explains his problem and Leo says no, and then Tom says, bad play, Leo. That immediately the audience says, oh, okay, this Tom here is an interesting guy, because he sees the conflict between these two heavyweights, and how is he going to negotiate between those two, and he's not afraid to give his opinion. And so these are horrible people. They're murderers, racketeers, gamblers, abusing people all over the place, but it doesn't matter because we relate to them as human beings on that level. And the people making the Wheel of Time show, see, Robert Jordan understood that. Robert Jordan knew that if he wanted to tell a story about the Country Bumpkins reacting to a wizard coming into their village, then he had to establish what was important to those people. And what's important to those people is the status quo. And you've got, right in the beginning, you've got Rand and his father walking along the road the same way they do every spring. Everything is the same. He's got his bow, and everything's, they're expecting this is just going to be another boring walk, and it isn't. But stuff doesn't start blowing up right away. Not before he gets to town and talks to all his friends, and he sees Egwene, and that's that. The first 50 pages of The Eye of the World, nothing happens. And honestly, if you haven't read the book, I don't want to ruin it for you, but there's not much of a plot, honestly. It's just these people leave town and they go, across the country to places they've never been before. And that's what's important, is that we know from the beginning that these are status quo people who don't want anything to do with this silly stuff that's going on in the rest of the world. And they can't have that. So I wonder if they get that. People keep saying to me, oh, it's not going to be exactly like the book. But that's not the problem. The problem is that it's not a good show. And the changes that they have made don't help the show, don't help make it a more interesting show. Tom is just one example. That's just one example of how it could have been interesting, but it's not. Just bad choices. Now there are other things that, again, like in my previous video where I said the things that just don't make sense. The White Cloaks absolutely do not make sense. There's nothing about what happens with the White Cloaks in episode 2 or 3. Nothing about what happens with them. See, I can't even freaking remember. There's nothing about what happens to them that's interesting at all, or that makes sense at all. You don't know who they are. You don't know why they believe what they believe. You don't know what they have against Aes Sedai. But suddenly they're burning an Aes Sedai while they eat lunch, and nobody cares. Or they're just going about their business, eating lunch, burning a woman at the stake. It's just one guy sitting there watching. and then they meet Eamon the merry band, Moraine and the boys and Egwene meet Eamon Valda, and he's got, who I think is Jaikim Carradine, who's from the Hand of the Light, the torturers. And he comes up to her and says, these guys are all just fondling her, you know? And he comes in and says, oh, you know, you really ought to see an Aes Sedai about that. Really. The guy who spent his whole life camped out near Tar Valon waiting for the moment when he can go kill all these women. And he's saying, you know, you really ought to get that checked out. You got to go see the Tar Valon witches. Yeah, I'd highly recommend that. These people that I've spent my whole life trying to eradicate. Really? And he's got Jaikim Carradine who can take him in, like, and torture him for being a dark friend. Right there. What the hell? That's just a total WTF moment. In addition to all the just like silly, you know, misplaced dialogue that's just like, you've killed us all, you know. It's just, come on, she wouldn't say that. What is the point of saying that in that moment? So I just, honestly, I'm just not even interested in watching the episode 4. Episode 4 came out Friday? The minor 7th chord just sounds so different from the full minor chord. Wait, what is that? Anyway, so I've been reading the Tamir trilogy by Lynn Flueling, which is an excellent book, excellent situation, excellent as far as fantasy goes, excellent as far as human interest, you know, like the whole point of telling stories goes. So I've been watching Dope Sick. I watched Get Back, the Beatles thing by Peter Jackson, which was incredible. You know, seeing the Beatles be human beings was just amazing. And I don't see any reason to keep troubling myself with this silly show. It's not the Wheel of Time. It does not have about it what is so great about Robert Jordan's books. Just read the books. Just read the books. That's my final word. Read the books. They're fantastic.